All right. Um, thanks everyone for joining right now. I know people are still joining, but we're almost five past the hour. So welcome everyone to another session of our IIT Guwahati Alumni Association webinar series. As you all know, this is an opportunity to bring together the IITG community. And the community involves alumni, students, faculty, and staff. And to engage in influential thought leaders and innovators across the industry. Through these sessions, our goal is to foster continuous learning, inspire new ideas, and strengthen connections that support the personal and professional growth of the community. Today, today we are honored to have Rohit Jain, a distinguished IITG alumnus and a key figure in the blockchain and the Web3 ecosystem. Rohit is currently the Chief Strategy and Investment Officer at CoinDCX and heads their Web3 businesses. With an extensive experience as an investor, as an advisor, an entrepreneur across finance, technology, and media, Rohit has a wealth of insights to share about the blockchain industry and its future. His background includes pivotal roles with renowned organizations like Fundamentum, Mintra, and McKinsey & Co., in addition to mentoring and founding multiple startups. In today's session, titled Unleashing the Power of Decentralization, Insights from CoinDCX Strategic Leader, Rohit will delve into the exciting world of blockchain and Web3, covering the foundational aspects and sharing key insights into the emerging trends. So whether you are an entrepreneur or tech enthusiast or just curious about the blockchain potential, I think this session promises to be an insightful and a thought-provoking one for you all. So in that spirit, we encourage you all to participate actively. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom, or you can raise your hand, use that feature so that I can unmute you and you can talk about it. So having said that, without much further ado, please join me in welcoming Rohit to share his valuable insights with us. Rohit, please take it up.
Hey, thanks, Vikash. Thanks for that introduction, and good to see everyone here. And I think at least three of you guys have responded all across from 2004 to 2020. I was hoping that some of my batchmates from 2001 would join, but I'll probably ping them or send them this video later. By way of a quick introduction, I'm IIT Guwahati 2001. I was 1 year ahead of Vikash in IIT Guwahati. We were the third batch of Guwahati. So for the first, I think 2 years or the first 3 years, we weren't even on campus. We traveled to campus from the city to the campus in a bus every day. And the fourth year is when we were on campus full time. So I have very, very fond memories of IIT Guwahati, and some of my best friends are still from IIT Guwahati. So it's an absolute pleasure doing this session with you guys. With that as a context, let me kind of start. And I've put together a few slides. We'll walk through those slides, and if folks have any questions, either please feel free to interrupt me or just write them on chat, and I'll take them up. Okay, so let me just share my screen. I'm just going to switch off my video. It just becomes easier to talk through a deck if the video is switched off.
Sure, Rohit.
Vikash, are you able to see my screen in full screen mode?
Yep, I can see it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Okay, great. So let me just get started. See, essentially, this is the evolution of web from what we call Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Now, folks would have seen this at some place or the other, but Web 1 was mostly static, read-based. You guys won't remember, but Vikash and I will, when we were on campus and we had those very slow dial-up modems that we'd connect the internet to, and, we try to open up a Yahoo page. Which would take or some on Netscape, it would take 10 minutes to open. But those are very static Web 1 read-only pages. Web 2 is, of course, what we are most familiar with and where all of us have spent our careers in, which is more read and write. And Web 3 adds another element of ownership on top of it. So in Web 2, The folks running the servers, the folks running the protocols, etc., are very centralized, and in some ways they've done the innovation, but it continues to operate within their walled gardens, and people participating in the networks don't have any ownership or a way to kind of play a part in the economic structure of that protocol. So, for example, if it's Facebook or Google, we as users of Facebook and Google, of course, don't have any ownership of Facebook and Google. I think someone's going to have to mute themselves.
Yeah, I did it. Yeah.
So, those are that's a very basic introduction to Web3. But diving a little deeper into what is blockchain, and the way I've tried to organize this session is start from the absolute basics and then move towards some trends that we are seeing emerging. Just to give folks a full spectrum of what's happening in the Web3 space. So we'll start with what is blockchain, something very, very basic. And blockchain, of course, started with the Bitcoin white paper in 2008, 2009 by Satoshi Nakamura. In fact, we had our 16th year anniversary of the white paper by Satoshi Nakamura. And just a couple of days back, it was on the day of Diwali, 31st October. But what is blockchain? So blockchain is nothing but a distributed, secure digital ledger. Sounds like a little bit of a mouthful, but let me quickly walk you guys through this. What I mean by a distributed, secure digital ledger. A ledger is simple, right? Even back in the day, before we had computers, etc., and any sort of digital technology, a ledger is just a piece of paper where we write that Vikash gave Rohit $100, and it's an immutable entry in the ledger that Rohit cannot deny it as long as both Rohit and Vikash have signed that entry. So a ledger is nothing but a record of a transaction, and it can be in a physical form as well. Then came digital ledgers, which are again nothing but databases. But the challenge with the digital ledgers and databases is that you need a central entity to run and manage that database. And we as users need to trust that central entity running and managing that database, that it's not doing anything malicious, it's not changing any data because it has full control of the data. We as users and consumers have no control or ownership of that data in some sense. So there's a huge trust element there. Now, what blockchain is, it took that database at its very, very core simplistic level. It took that database and it made it distributed and enabled trust and security in a distributed environment. And the way you do that is you have a bunch of nodes running the same database. All of those nodes need to validate any transaction that changes the state of that database. That's what makes it distributed. That's what makes it secure. That's what makes it immutable. Immutable being that no one can change or even no one can challenge the state of the database because that state has been achieved via consensus mechanism. Now, there are other, and the way you kind of make this distributed database work is through a very simple but beautiful mechanism of incentive design, which is that, and the incentive mechanism and the consensus mechanism of Bitcoin, which is the first, token, was that the amount of energy you need to spend to update the state of the database will generally be more than the total amount of energy that all the nodes need to come together to update a malicious state of the database. So there is a incentive mechanism to ensure that the nodes don't collaborate to incorrectly update the state of the database. That was in Bitcoin. And Ethereum, there's a different consensus mechanism to make sure that malicious actors aren't able to update the state in a wrong way. So through this simple incentive mechanism, and that incentive mechanism, by the way, is run by tokens. So tokens, for all the backlash that they receive, tokens are a core part. It's the oil that runs the engine of blockchains. It's the way you provide crypto economic security to the network, number one. Number two, it's also the way that you distribute incentives to all the node operators which are running and securing the network. So again, just to simplify, blockchain, Bitcoin being the first kind of blockchain and Bitcoin being the first distributed ledger. is nothing but a distributed database. That's essentially what it is. And it's distributed because there are a bunch of, there's no central entity running that database. There are a bunch of nodes running that database. And there is cryptoeconomic security provided by the BTC token and the consensus mechanism. So that was Bitcoin. And that was the core principle of any secure distributed ledger of any blockchain technology. And this came up in 2008, 2009. The next innovation or the next significant innovation in the Web3 space, I'd say, came up with Ethereum. So the Ethereum white paper was written in 2014, 2015, and the network was launched around 2017. It was in the ICO boom of 2017 that the Ethereum network was launched. And the innovation that Bitcoin brought to the table, it's on the same kind of blockchain technology and distributed ledger technology. But the innovation that Ethereum got to the table was that it built a virtual machine on top of it, on top of the database. And it basically said, you can store anything in the database. Why not store code in the database? And then we're going to have a virtual machine that's going to run this code. Now, the benefit of this is you had a database, and now you had a computation machine on top of it, or a CPU on top of it that understands and that has a programming language called Solidity that understands Solidity and can execute code. So it kind of built the computation layer on top of it. This computation layer, there is this piece of code is called a smart contract, which is stored on the Ethereum ledger, and it is run by the Ethereum virtual machine. Now, the way this works is it's still pretty much the same model, which is a blockchain, and a copy of the blockchain is stored in every node running that particular blockchain. Even in the case of Ethereum, the Ethereum network is stored on every node running the Ethereum network. So what happens is in addition to data, even when a smart contract is written and a smart contract is invoked and a piece of code is invoked on the smart contract, a bunch of nodes actually execute the code and submit the final results onto the blockchain. And then there is a consensus mechanism that is brought into play to record the updated state of the transaction on the blockchain. So Ethereum added essentially programmability on top of the database. And that completely blew up the space in terms of made blockchain as a technology extremely, extremely expressive. I mean, once you have a database and you have computation on top of it, you can build anything on top of it, right? The only difference between a TradFi model or a traditional model or a Web2 model and a Web3 model was it was distributed and not within the walled gardens of any one company. Today we see, this landscape has completely blown up. And even amongst, and basically just taking a step back, my fundamental view is that there will be some technologies which will give a 10x better user experience by being built in a distributed manner versus by being built in a centralized manner. One example that I like to use is, let's say, for example, Facebook. Yeah, I don't know since when have you guys been using Facebook, but I started using it around 2006. And for all practical purposes, the interface of Facebook and the experience of Facebook, if I were being honest, hasn't changed too much since 2006. The news feed, the left bar, the right bar, the top nav, etc., etc. A lot of the experience still looks exactly like it did even back in 2006. Added a tremendous amount of value, started a completely new industry, which is, of course, social. But the experience hasn't changed. Now, imagine if Facebook was completely decentralized, it was open source, it was decentralized. Anyone could come and build on top of Facebook. And here I'm going to use another kind of buzzword that we use in Web3 called composable. Web3 is because it's open source, because it's distributed, it is fundamentally permissionless and composable in the sense that no one has to go to a Facebook in this case and say, I want to integrate with you and strike a commercial deal with a Facebook. It is permissionless that anyone can build on top of it. And it is composable that it's fundamentally made in a way where API endpoints is a very core principle of how any smart contract is written. And that's how you interact with a smart contract. But what that means is anyone can use, existing smart contracts written on the Ethereum network. So anyone can use use the API endpoints on existing smart contracts and build on top of it. So it's permissionless and composable that anyone can permissionlessly build on top of it. Coming back to the example of Facebook, now imagine if Facebook was permissionlessly composable, that anyone could come and build on top of it. I personally believe that Facebook would have looked way different and significantly better than the way it does today. So, my fundamental view again is Web3, that even if 5%, forget about 10%, 15%, 50, 30%, or 50%, even if 5% of consumer internet use cases can give a fundamentally better experience by being built in a decentralized manner versus a centralized manner, that in itself is a huge opportunity. And not to say that everything should be built in a decentralized manner, absolutely not. There are lots of things which will provide a better customer experience. And the North Star here is customer experience. So there are a ton of things which can be better built in a centralized manner versus a decentralized manner, but I also believe a ton of things that can be built in a decentralized manner. Some of the use cases that have gotten to initial product market fit are DeFi, which is, of course, decentralized finance. And the second I'd say is gaming, where you're beginning to see some adoption. You're also seeing pockets of innovation across the board, but these are two, I would say, have seen the most amount of traction. And we'll spend a few minutes talking about DeFi a little later in the deck as well. Here too, I've tried to highlight a little bit about DeFi, that every aspect of finance is now being put on chain. Stable coins, which is our fiat currency, whether it's the dollar and USD in the US, INR in India, an equivalent of stablecoin needs to exist in Web3, and those are called fiat currencies need to exist in Web3, and those are called stablecoins. On the rightmost column, you have the TradFi version of it, which is the USD dollar for stable coins. Then you have a centralized Web3 version of it, which is USDT, which is Tether. And then you have a decentralized version of stable coins, which is called Maker and through MakerDAO. Lending and borrowing has also been put on the chain. On the right-hand side, of course, you have your traditional banks, and then you have the middle column, which is on the lending borrowing kind of row, which is BlockFi, which is a centralized approach to lending and borrowing in Web3. And you, of course, have completely decentralized approaches to lending, borrowing as well, which is Compound. I won't cover all of them, but I will cover the next row, which is exchanges. So you, of course, have Robinhood, which is not even an exchange, well, a quasi-exchange of sorts. It's much more of a broker. But then you have centralized Web3 exchanges like Coinbase, and then you have decentralized exchanges like Uniswap. So, you can see, and then across the board, right, all the way from derivatives to other kind of asset management and other use cases, data, etc. Everything's kind of being put on chain, and everything can be put on chain. The model of putting these things on chain and running in a decentralized manner needs to be a little different than being run in a centralized manner. Say, for example, Uniswap, which is an exchange. The way an exchange on the blockchain runs today is very different from the way an exchange runs in TradFi. So an exchange in TradFi runs via order books. So you have a buy and a sell order, and the order book, there's a matching engine that matches the buy and the sell order in the order book, and that's how a transaction takes place. On blockchains, you fundamentally don't have an order book. Well, now you do, but initially when Web3 started getting adoption, you didn't have order books because Web3 wasn't at scale. When I say it wasn't at scale, it wasn't fast enough and it was very expensive. So you couldn't have the, order books weren't economically feasible. So they invented a new innovation called AMMs, automated market makers, which is a very simple mathematical equation to pricing based on supply and demand. I won't go into the details there, but of course, there was some innovation there. This, I would say, is the front end of finance. The other thing that DeFi and Web3 does is it completely innovates on the back end of finance, which is something that is not spoken about very often. Say, for example, even when you buy something on a Robinhood or in India, if you're in India, you'd buy on a Zerodha, etc. The settlement time period for buying something on Robinhood or Zerodha is T+1, T+2. When you're doing a UPI transaction in India, for example, even though the transaction seems instant, at the end of the day, the banks are doing a physical settlement of all the trades and netting off between themselves. And there's a huge amount of paperwork involved there. Remittance, of course, have always been a mind-numbingly harrowing process. So, the way I think about it is that fintech, if you're familiar with fintech, fintech innovated on the front end of finance and financial services. When I say they innovated on the front end of financial services, they basically made the user experience fundamentally better. The onboarding experience, collection of data, et cetera, et cetera. They made the user experience fundamentally better. But Web3 is innovating at the back end of finance. So the settlement is now, you don't have to do those end of the day settlements in a very physical manner. Everything is on chain. The minute the transaction happens, it gets recorded on chain, on the blockchain. It's immutable. No one can deny it. No one can dispute it. So blockchain is, when it comes to finance, blockchain is not only innovating on the front end experience of finance, but also fundamentally changing the archaic 50, 70, 100 year old back end of financial services. Not only DeFi, but you're seeing innovation across the board, and you're seeing a lot of traditional players adopt Web3 technologies as well. You have browser equivalents in the Web3 space. You have Spotify equivalents and YouTube and content equivalents in the Web3 space, where a YouTube or an Instagram can be significant rent seekers of sorts, where people creating the content sometimes don't get their fair due. But the minute you build this in a decentralized manner, and you don't need a centralized entity running the platform, running the marketplace, a lot more of the revenue actually goes to the content creators and people running the nodes and operating the nodes. So you're beginning to see pockets of beyond DeFi, beyond gaming. You're beginning to see pockets of things moving over to the Web3 side, where fundamentally users are able to get a better user experience. You're seeing a lot of traditional players enter the space. A lot of them are banks today, even traditional banking organizations and financial institutions like a Visa, Fidelity, a BlackRock, BNB Paribas, etc. Everyone's beginning to adopt Web3 rails. Even in India, banks have been directed, traditional banks in India have been directed to try to figure out how to use Web3 to drive efficiencies in their operations. I fundamentally believe that Web3 is going to be part of the core tech stack and will touch each and every company in the world. In some cases, it will be very front and center and will drive the user experience. In some cases, it could be a very small part of the tech stack, but the technology fundamentally adds value. And I do believe that blockchain as a technology will be a very fundamental part of the tech stack that touches each and every company in the times to come. Okay, so just keeping going. Vikash, before I get into key trends in Web3, do you want me to take a pause here in case folks have any question? I know all of this has been a little bit of a mouthful, especially if you're not as familiar with Web3. So I'm happy to take a pause here and take one or two questions.
Hi Rohit,
Vikash,
can you explain a little bit more about node? What exactly is a node? Who operates? How many nodes are required? Uh,
sure.
in a physical world, like what exactly is a
Sure, Deepak, absolutely. So a node is nothing but a server. So if Facebook is running their server infrastructure and running everything on in a centralized data warehouse, a node is nothing but it's essentially the Facebook server, but it's being run by multiple folks who are securing that entire network. Now there are obviously efficiencies on top of it that you don't need to run the entire code. You don't have to store all the data. There are ways of pruning the data, adding efficiency, etc. But to simplify it, the node is actually the blockchain. The node operator is actually has a copy of the blockchain. Number one is the one who's updating the state of the blockchain at his level. He is the one who's running the code in the smart contract at his level and then submitting the end result to the network for consensus and then finally recording it on the blockchain. So it's the very the most atomic part of the blockchain and the servers that run the actual blockchain and drive consensus on the blockchain. And again, there are lots of efficiencies that you can draw, that you can build on top of the node architecture. So for example, in the case of Ethereum, they have different kinds of nodes. You have read-only nodes, which are called light nodes. You have archival nodes that actually store a lot of historical data. And then you have something called full nodes, and full nodes also have different configurations. A full node will, of course, run the full blockchain, but will archive a lot of the data as well. So you have different kinds of nodes. But if you talk about a light node, for example, just to give you some context and an example, light node, the eventual end goal is that a light node should be able to be run, and actually even a full node should be able to be run on your own mobile handset. So you don't need heavy servers to run these nodes because of the efficiency that they've kind of brought to bear. Okay, great. There are no other questions. I'll just keep going.
Thanks, Rohit.
And Rohit, one quick question is, you earlier you talked about the code being stored in the database. So that what is the difference from the normal architecture there? Even today also we have code and there are compute nodes, there are storage nodes. So how did it end up being innovative in the case of Web3, where code was stored in the database and that enabled the smart contract? It sounds to me to be similar to me. So if you can please explain the difference there.
So the difference is in the word distributed.
I see.
All of it existed. All of it existed, but it was centralized. Facebook was operating their own node and running their own server. And Facebook essentially dictates what happens to everything that happens on Facebook to users, and no one else can build on top of it. The beauty of blockchain and Web3, what it's brought to the table, is essentially the distributed nature and distributing all of this, where anyone can come in a permissionless way, in a composable manner, build on top of each other.
I see. And in this model, the entire database is stored on all the nodes?
Yes, the entire database. So there are efficiencies, like I was just explaining to Deepak, but for simplicity's sake, you can imagine that the entire database is stored on all the nodes. But then again, like I was explaining to Deepak, there are a lot of efficiencies.
Yeah.
So for example, you have light nodes, you have full nodes, you have archival nodes, etc.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions before we move forward from anyone on the call? All right. I think we are good for now, Rohit.
Sure. Okay, so I'll talk about a few trends in the Web3 space. Hopefully, so far I was just trying to bring everyone up to speed on what the basic blockchain and Web3 technologies are. Now we'll talk about a few trends and go a little bit deeper into them. So in terms of adoption, if you see the graph on the left-hand side, the black line is internet users since the day it was launched and since the year it was launched. The red line is the wallets created in the Web3 space. What you see is Web3 adoption is very closely mirroring internet adoption. And even though today, and today a little less so, people question the power of Web3, the utility of Web3, and that's exactly what it was with even the internet, pre-2000, pre-1999. But it's heartening to see, at least for us in the industry, that Web3 is kind of mirroring internet adoption, and there are lots of trends that are driving this, and some key trends that are driving this. We're beginning to see, and which will continue to drive adoption. One is we're beginning to see a lot of institutional participation when the big guys like a BlackRock or a Fidelity, etc., come into the space. When a Facebook or a Google start launching technologies on Web3, etc., that gives a lot of validation that this adoption will continue. The other thing that's going to continue to drive this adoption is that we fundamentally believe that scalability has been solved to a large extent, and I'll cover that a little later. And as we enter into the next bull market, we expect a lot of adoption. There's also more regulatory clarity coming. So far, all of the adoption that we've gotten to has been in a very gray area where people are uncertain from a regulations point of view, and there's been a trend globally speaking. And the way I think about regulations is the interplay of regulation and innovation fundamentally is that regulations fundamentally have to play catch up. That's the job description. That's a feature and not a bug. Regulations cannot front run innovation by design, because there is no way a regulator can know the kind of innovation that's going to come down the line. So regulations always has to play catch up. But there's never been a time where if a technology is fundamentally 10xing customers' consumer experience, that the technology eventually hasn't been adopted. Eventually consumer experience is what wins, and which is what we're seeing even with regulation in the Web3 space, that most global economies, including the US, not only Trump, and I know the elections are and the results are going to be out soon, but not only Trump, even the Democrats now are talking favorably about a lot more favorably about Web3 than they were in the past. In India, the regulators are talking a lot more favorably. There are in Europe, crypto regulations are actually already out. It's called MiCA, MiCA, and it's going to be enforced January onwards. And it's fairly progressive and fairly supportive of Web3 technology. So given institutional kind of players coming into the space, given the impending bull market, which we expect 2025 to be, not any investment advice, my own personal view, and giving increasing clarity and crypto regulations, we expect that this trend is going to continue of Web3 adoption. And with adoption, a lot of value creation and value capture will also happen in the Web3 space. So that was a little bit of a high-level overview of where Web3 is in terms of its adoption curve. I'll talk about 3 trends that I see in this space. On the DeFi side, we've already covered a lot of it, so I'll quickly run through it. The second is infra and data, and the third is experience layer. I'll talk a little bit more about the experience layer because that's also the area that I work in. But I'll cover the other 2 quickly as well. So starting with DeFi, like I was saying, is the first kind of industry which has gotten to product market fit of being built on blockchain and in a Web3 manner, and is able to offer a significantly better customer experience. I mean, I kid you not, once you start using wallets, or once you start using Web3 to do simple money transfers between friends and start using Web3 to start paying for services, that user experience is just so much better than even UPI, for example, in India, even though UPI, I think, is probably the best payment experience in the world. But, it's just such a better consumer experience. And that's just a very simple use case like payments. When it comes to lending and borrowing, oh my God, Web3 is just so much significant and so much better, significantly better than anything that you see in the Web2 space all across the world. Some of the innovations we've already spoken about, DeFi solutions, all the way from exchanges, lending, borrowing, etc., etc. We've spoken a little bit about stable coins, which is how fiat currency, USD and INR, is represented on blockchains. RWA tokenization. RWA is fundamentally real world assets tokenization. And I've already covered this. We'll spend a few minutes on RWA. What RWA is, you basically take any real world asset, you tokenize it, and then you give it life in the Web3 space. So for example, if you have traditional equity, what you can do is you can give it to a custodian, and those kind of solution providers exist now, where they will take your traditional equity, it'll be transferred to the ownership will be transferred to a custodian, and let's say you have Apple stock. So you transfer ownership of your Apple stock to a custodian. The custodian gives you a wrapped Apple kind of a token, or it gives you an Apple token, which will reside in the Web3 space on the blockchain. And once you have an Apple token on the blockchain, buying and selling that token just becomes so much easier. It's a single click, no hassle at all. You can borrow against it. You can participate in all sorts of LP pools. LP pool is another concept in the DeFi space. But a lot of the friction that traditional financial systems bring to the table once an asset is tokenized and that asset exists in Web3 and blockchain, a lot of that friction is removed, and it just opens up new use cases. So whether it's tokenizing traditional equity and borrowing against them, or even imagine if someone in Vietnam wants to buy or wants to take exposure to an Apple stock in the US, there is no way he can do it in traditional finance. In Web3, it's a simple single click experience for someone sitting in Vietnam to not only buy the Apple stock, but the very next microsecond borrow against that Apple stock as well. A lot of times people don't want to sell their stock, they just want to borrow against it. And he's able to do that very, very easily. You can, in fact, you can tokenize anything, right? US treasuries are being tokenized, where if people want to get exposure to US treasuries, they don't have to go to a Robinhood, for example, to buy US treasuries. A lot of times people don't know where to buy US treasuries and earn the debt or invest in a relatively safer asset. Real estate is being tokenized, art is being tokenized, high value real world items like antique cars are being tokenized. So a lot of things can be tokenized, and this is just another example of real world use cases that had a lot of friction on them. By tokenizing them and then bringing them onto the Web3 space, you reduce a lot of friction and increase transaction flow in those assets. I'm not going to cover very quickly about stablecoins. Remittance is of course a large use case of fiat currencies, but in general, what you'll see is you'll see this bar on the on the chart on the left hand side, this bar graph on the left hand side. The second last bar is stablecoins. All of the others are countries holding US treasuries. So today, stablecoins is, I think, the number 15th holder of US treasuries. So the way stablecoins work is that you basically take stablecoin is nothing but it is tokenizing USD and giving a tokenized version of USD, the dollar, on the blockchain. So what you fundamentally do is you take your USD, you give it to a custodian. In the case, it may be a Tether, which is USDT, or a Circle, which is USDC. You give your dollars to a Tether or a Circle, and in lieu of that dollar, they fundamentally give you a token which then resides in the Web3 space. And that's how you get a stable kind of currency in the Web3 space on the blockchain. What that also means is that these companies, Tether and Circle, have a lot of US reserves and literally billions of dollars worth of US reserves. I think combined, they probably have maybe 250, $300 billion of US reserves. So if you compare them to other countries holding US treasuries, and invested in US treasuries and the US dollar, stablecoin already ranks number 15 despite the regulatory uncertainty. Once there's regulatory clarity, we expect that this industry is going to explode a lot more from here. Another use case for stablecoins, besides having a fiat version or a stable fiat version of USD INR on blockchains and in Web3, is remittance as a use case. All of us would have probably remitted money, let's say from the US to India at some point in our career. It's a mind-numbingly harrowing process, going to the banks, all the paperwork. It's also very expensive. The reason why it's mind-numbingly harrowing is not only because of regulations, but also because of the back-end infrastructure. So it has to get routed through multiple banking partners across the world before it finally arrives into a bank in India. And that costs money, that takes time for it to happen. If it were on the blockchain, it literally, if you look at, 40, what might take 30, 40, $45 to do a wire transfer in the real world will take less than a cent, will take 0.1 cents or 0.0 or $0.01 in the Web3 space. Not only in terms of cost, but it'll also be instant. So Vikash could send me $100 for less, the cost would be significantly less than a cent, significantly less than transfer, even domestic transfers, I'd say. He'd be able to send it to me literally in the click of a button and I'd get it instantly.
So it's a way of reducing volatility, right? I mean, you're increasing the speed, it's instantaneous transfer. And I guess you're trying to reduce the arbitrage there as well, like providing more stability.
So Vikash, I'd say that's an added advantage, because if money is in transit for for a smaller duration of time, it does have an impact on positive impact on volatility. But the end goal is you should be able to give me money instantly. I mean, that's the whole promise of digital, right?
Right.
That you and I should be able to transact across borders instantly for the lowest cost possible. And that's what Web3 enables.
Got it. And one comment or question on the previous slide, Rohit, about the tokens, and you referred to RWAs, real world assets. Um, so so here you talked about how you're tokenizing a real world asset here. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on how the tokenization can can be applied to, or rather, is it being applied to things like real estate, bonds? I think you already talked about bonds and treasuries, but I'm curious about the larger ones, the real estate part of it. Is that happening, or what's the use case there?
Yeah. So there are tons and tons of startups working in the RWA space across different asset classes. So we'll see and I don't think everything should be tokenized. I don't think everything will add value by being tokenized. I don't think everything should be tokenized. You should think about tokenization or fractional ownership, for example. The minute people talk about tokenization, the first kind of use case that comes to people's minds is it'll enable fractional ownership. And yes, from an infra point of view, from a tech point of view, it does enable fractional ownership, but do users want it? What I'm trying to say is that people are working to tokenize pretty much a lot of different real world asset classes. But also taking a slightly more cautious view. I don't think everything should be tokenized, and not everything will provide a 10x better customer experience by being tokenized. A few things will, a few things won't. For example, something like equities. I don't, at one point, I was very excited about tokenizing equities, US equities, and making them available in Vietnam for people to buy. But today, it's a longer conversation. Today, I'm a little less excited about that use case. I'm a lot more excited about tokenizing US treasuries, as long as we can cross the regulatory hurdle there, than tokenizing US equities, for example. I think bonds is a completely broken market across the world, no matter which country you're in.
Yeah,
Bond debt, uh, because it's over the counter, it's a completely broken experience. The buying, selling, transparency, etc., etc. That's one industry. Forget about going cross-border, even within a country. I think the bond market can be made way more efficient by being on chain. So just giving you a flavor of a lot of things are being tokenized, but B, and more importantly, not everything should be.
sure. No, that makes sense. Any other questions from the group here before we move forward?
Okay.
All right. Again, if you do have a question, just please unmute yourself and ask about it. Thank you. Back to you, Rohit. Thank you.
Sure. The other trend I'll talk about is the way infra is being built out in the Web3 space. And essentially, the way I think about it is that Web3 fundamentally is where internet was, or Web2 was, in the late 1990s. So what was happening in 1997, 1998? What was happening was routers were being created, protocols were being established. The fundamental building blocks of Web2 that we see today were being established. And by the way, also the most valuable companies in Web2, the foundations of a lot of those companies were laid in the late 1990s, whether it's the Microsofts of the world, or whether it's the Apples of the world, etc. The Amazons of the world, all of them were kind of laid in the late 1990s as well. But that's where I see Web3 being today. I also don't think Web3 will take as long to get to the same level of adoption as Web3 did, because we fundamentally as a society are at a very different place than we were in the late 1990s. Today, technology is adopted a lot faster. So Web3 will be adopted a lot quicker than Web2 was, but that's where it is. And what that means is a lot of effort is going onto the infra side of things, and building the infrastructure and scaling the infrastructure. I won't cover all of this, but I'll just maybe cover some of the terminology which may be helpful to people as they go out and read a little bit more about it. So you have layer ones. Layer one. So what the box on the top left corner is called new layer ones, and layer ones is nothing but your fundamental blockchain. So Bitcoin is a layer one. Ethereum is a layer one. There are two chains that came out of the Facebook ecosystem called Sui and Aptos. Both of them are layer one. Solana is a layer one. Avalanche and Near, the other protocols written here, are all layer ones. Now, on top of layer ones, you have layer twos being developed, and which is why they're called layer one. So on top of, specifically on top of Ethereum, layer twos are being developed. And the reason why layer twos are being developed, and these are called rollups, so in the bottom left boxes, you see optimistic rollups and zero knowledge rollups. These are two of the most popular kinds of layer twos that are being developed. What is happening with Ethereum is that for all the power that Ethereum brings to the table, it is fundamentally expensive. If everyone is trying to commit transactions onto the Ethereum blockchain, it is going to become expensive. It is going, because there's only limited space and limited number of nodes running the Ethereum network. So they've added a layer of abstraction to improve its scalability and also make it more application specific. And that's how the concept of rollups initially started, to solve for the scalability problem of Ethereum and make it massively and almost infinitely scalable. There are two different approaches of these rollups. One is an optimistic approach to a rollup. The other is a zero knowledge approach to a rollup. Again, I won't go into the what optimistic rollups are and zero knowledge rollups are, but just to give you a sense, if you want to do a transaction on the Ethereum L1, it might cost you a couple of dollars. At one point, it probably costed you $10 to $15 to do a simple transaction on the Ethereum network. Let's say in 2017, 2018. Today, it probably costs you $1 or $2 to do transaction on the Ethereum network. But if you do a transaction on one of these rollups, either the optimistic rollups or the zero knowledge rollups, it's going to cost you less than a cent to do a transaction. It's going to cost you lesser than it costs you even in the TradFi space. Then you have application-specific rollups as well. While optimistic rollups and zero-knowledge rollups are still public chains that are being developed in a fairly standardized way where any use case can live on top of these blockchains, there are application-specific rollups as well, where people can customize chains for their specific application. So say, for example, if there is an exchange, and Uniswap is the most popular exchange in the Web3 space, Uniswap recently launched their own app chain, application-specific chain. And there they fundamentally kind of tweak the underlying blockchain specifically for their use case to make it more efficient. So you have application-specific blockchains that are coming up as well. And then you see the box at the bottom right, which is data availability. But data availability and even these rollups fundamentally speak to a very core principle that Web3 is moving towards, which is modularity. So they're splitting up the three basic components needed to run a Web3 system or any computer system. One is consensus, the other is data storage, and the third is execution. So while initially everything existed on one L1, layer one, so everything, the consensus and the trust was given by the node operators of the layer one. So consensus and trust and security was given by the layer one. But also the data storage was only happening on the layer one, and the execution was also only happening on the layer one. Now what they've done is they've split these three things, and they said not everything needs to reside on the layer one. What is now residing on the layer one for the most part, at least in the Ethereum ecosystem, is the security. So ETH, which is the token of Ethereum, which is the fundamental currency of securing the Ethereum network, is the strongest kind of feature of Ethereum in some ways, and that's what they're continuing to leverage. So Ethereum is being used from a security perspective. Layer twos that are being built on top of Ethereum, execution and data storage is being outsourced to layer twos. So now what is happening is you have different data availability layers. So while execution is residing on layer twos, optimistic rollups or zero knowledge rollups, or even application specific chains, even data storage is being moved off of these layer twos and application specific chains into different data availability layers like Celestia, etc., etc. So it's being, it's kind of following a very modular roadmap. Again, you'll probably be able to relate to how internet kind of evolved from moving from a very monolithic architecture to a very modular architecture where different players are taking care of different parts of the entire kind of infrastructure.
So one question there, Rohit. When you say that it is modular and things are being taken off chain, the scalability is being handled in layer two and all that. Um, what's the intuition there? I mean, if it is scalable and you're moving that into layer two, and you're calling that off chain, does that mean it is not recorded, or is it the case that it's recorded elsewhere on a different
No,
chain?
so good question, Vikash. So it's actually recorded on the Ethereum network itself. It's batched together. So it's compressed and it's batched.
I see. Okay, so all that compression and scaling is happening in layer two, and the
Yeah,
entire batch is given to layer one to record on the chain.
exactly.
I see.
And that's fundamentally how databases also work. When you look at data warehouses and large kind of data solutions out there, that's fundamentally how it works, which is that you have different levels of efficiency of batching, of compression, and then finally it's stored on the core database. So in some ways, even if you look at the people kind of building a lot of these technologies, they actually come from especially on the database side, they come from folks who built data warehouses in the Web2 side and bringing in some of those bringing in some of that learning and intuition of scalability from the Web2 side, whether it's sharding, whether it's compression, et cetera, et cetera.
And before you store it onto the chain, Rohit, I mean, when you're computing, when you're scaling and processing all that, you do go to other data sources, right? It doesn't have to be the chain to get all the data from. You have a number of other data sources. Probably that is what you were referring to earlier, from which you get the data. And those data sources could be traditional databases, like the Auroras, the RDSs, whatever. And then you process it, and then you compress it and store it on the chain. Is that how it goes?
So just a small correction there. So yes, if say for example, if an application, let's say an exchange is running on the chain, it's not like the entire exchange is only run. So the code is on the chain on the blockchain. So in that sense, it's immutable. You can look at the code. It is auditable. Audit reports are available. So all of that is on chain. But in terms of access to data, it may be pulling in data from from other blockchains. It may be pulling in data from other centralized sources as well. So data could be coming in from a lot of different places, even though the code resides on the chain and the final end state is updated on the chain.
Got it. That's very clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is one question in the chat, Rohit. I'll read it up.
Sure.
Is there a place like an aggregator website where we can see different startups that are coming in the Web3 space in different domains and for different RWAs?
Yeah. Just do a Google search. You'll find so many market maps of startups within each of these spaces, whether you want to look at RWA as a space, whether you want to look at data availability as a space, you'll find. So there's no one centralized repository, as you can imagine. But yeah, you can, this very easily Googleable.
Yes.
Sure. Okay. So, I won't cover the other aspects of, infrastructure. I'll come to experience layer also, just in the interest of time. I know we are coming up against the hour. So talking about the experience layer, and this is also the area where I spend more of my time kind of working. It's in the chain abstraction space. So fundamentally what this means is, and this is a mental model that I like to use, is that, for any technology, forget about Web3, but for any technology to get to mass adoption, there are three things that need to be solved for almost sequentially. The first is building the basic infrastructure. And even in the Web3 space, the infrastructure build out started from Satoshi Nakamura's Bitcoin paper in 2009, all the way to, and it's still going on, but, till 2017, 2018, we were working on the core infrastructure part of it. Once the infrastructure existed, then folks started working on scaling these networks, because these networks, the throughputs weren't good enough. It was very, very expensive, very limited space, et cetera, et cetera. 2017 onwards, up till I would say 2023, and of course it's going to continue going, but we hit some major milestones in 2023. So for example, the merge in the case of Ethereum, the merge happened where Ethereum moved from a proof of work consensus mechanism to a proof of stake consensus mechanism. And that opened up the Ethereum ecosystem tremendously from a scalability point of view. A lot of L2s grew significantly on it. The whole modular roadmap and the roll-up centric roadmap of Ethereum started playing out, which significantly improved the scalability of Ethereum. Not only Ethereum, other L1s also started coming up in 2023. So in 2023, I believe we hit a significant milestone as far as scaling is concerned. Obviously, it's a journey, and we're still on day zero. But I think we're now there where we can start seeing mass adoption use cases and mass applications being built on top of blockchain infrastructure. So that's the second edge of this triangle, and the third edge of this triangle is experience. What that fundamentally means is once the infra is kind of built out and the network is scalable and solved for scalability to a certain extent, unless the user experience and developer experience is solved for, it's never going to get to mass adoption. So what I mean by that is for the folks who might have tried using a Web3 wallet today, for all the power that Web3 brings to the table, the user experience is completely broken. You need to know what gas fees is. You need to know what chain you're operating on and what the native token, and you need to have that native token to pay gas fees. You need to sign a transaction 3 or 4 times, and it's a nerve-wracking experience. To give a very small example, for the folks who are more familiar with the space, is that let's say if you have a bunch of tokens on a Solana, which is a layer 1, and you want to sell that and buy a token on Base, which is a layer 2, which is Coinbase's chain. If you want to buy a token on Base, it's a very harrowing experience. On Solana, you first have to figure out how to get a wallet on Solana. Then you need to get the native token of Solana, which is Sol, onto your wallet. Then you need to do a wallet connect into a DEX on Solana, sell the token that you want to sell. Then you need to bridge your assets from a Solana to a Base. Then you need to get native token on Base to pay gas fees, and they do a wallet connect into a DEX on Base, and then do a transaction. Without going into details on this one, the takeaway here is it's a 7-8 step process. And in the Web2 space, a user is completely shielded from all of these complexities. When you're opening up a web page, you don't know where the packets are being routed, which routers, and what data warehouses the packets are going to, and the commercial model and the commercial agreements along the way, who's paying for what. In Web 2, the entire backend infrastructure is abstracted for the user. In Web3 today, it's not abstracted. You're exposed to each and every single transaction, and that's not how Web3 is going to get to adoption. And not only for the user, even for the developer, unless you're working at the core infra level, most developers should not have to worry about these complications. So that's what I mean by solving for experience, is that completely abstracting Web3, both for the user and the developer, and that's the third edge of this triangle of mass adoption, that when you solve for infra, you solve for scalability, and then you solve for experience as well, is when you're going to get to mass adoption. And this is the space that at least I'm spending a lot of time working on. And there's a very complicated problem. The 7-8 step process. It's not as simple as just writing a small piece of code and doing these 7-8 steps. It's actually fairly complicated and comes down to how blockchains very fundamentally kind of work. This just goes to talk a little bit about from where we are to where we want to get to. There are about, actually not even 50 million wallets. There are about 30 million unique wallets that are created, probably less than that. There are about over 500 million users, globally speaking, who own crypto. Most of them are on centralized exchanges like the Coinbases and the Binances of the world. And of course, there are 5.5 billion Web2 users, internet users. So there is a long journey to walk from the 50 million wallets that we are today to the 550 million crypto owners, people who are exposed to crypto, who want some amount of exposure in crypto, to the 5.5 billion Web2 users. And the only way we're going to walk this journey is by completely abstracting away Web3. So for all the power that Web3 brings to the table, it's also extremely complicated. And there needs to be players in the middle that do the heavy lifting of abstracting away this, all of this technology for both the user and the developer. I'm not trying to pitch our product, Octo. So Octo is part of CoinDCX. We're the largest exchange in India. I'm not trying to pitch Octo, but I'm just using it as an example of someone who's trying to abstract away Web3 for users. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into details, but we abstract away gas. Gas is how you pay the blockchain for using storage on the blockchain and computation power of the blockchain. We abstract away the chain, whether it's a Ethereum, which is EVM, Ethereum virtual machine, or a non-EVM chain. We completely abstract away the chain. You shouldn't have to know which chain you're operating on, a Solana, EVM, etc. All of, every chain, of course, has a different underlying tech stack, has a different way of working, has a different payload, etc., etc. So neither the user nor the developer should have to know what chain they're operating on or worry about those nuances. The wallet needs to be completely abstracted. It should be a very familiar social login experience, auth-based social login experience, sign in with your Google, Facebook, etc. You shouldn't have to worry about storing your seed phrases. You should be able to still recover your private key using a very familiar Web2-like experience. So wallet completely needs to be abstracted away. There is a concept of delegated flows in wallets as well. Today, if you want to do this 6-7 step process, moving your tokens from a Solana to a base, you'll need to sign that transaction 7 times. But if the wallet is abstracted away, it's going to be a single click experience. Again, not a simple problem to solve, because along with self-custody comes certain challenges as well. The transaction needs to be abstracted away, which is transactions need to be bundled. And again, neither the user nor the developer should be aware of what's happening, especially if you're talking about cross-chain transactions. The other nuance over here is that blockchains fundamentally are a synchronous state machine in the sense that they execute one transaction against one wallet address only in a sequential manner, one after another. To give the kind of user experiences that we need to give asynchronous experiences. So there are ways of making a synchronous state machine into and yet enable asynchronous flows on top of it. And then data, of course, also needs to be abstracted. So only when you abstract all of these things away, can you truly abstract Web3, both for the user and the developer, and give both of them a very Web2-like user experience. I'm not going to go through these examples. So that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to cover today, which is just kind of summarizing, starting from the basics of what a blockchain is, which is a distributed, secure digital ledger. Started with Bitcoin, which is nothing but a distributed database. Ethereum added the computation layer on top of it. Then various use cases started being built on top of Web3 technologies, where DeFi got to product market fit. But you're seeing a lot of innovation on DeFi, on infra, and now you're seeing a lot of work also happening in the experience layer, which is when we believe that this Web3 will truly get to mass adoption. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Let me pause there again if folks have questions.
Yeah, I would encourage the group to think about any questions while I ask my own question here. So this is great, Rohit. Thanks for providing the base here, our base understanding, and leveling up everyone here. One question I had in my mind is, we talked about the coin, the chain, the token. Uh, um, where does the DAO fit in here? DAO, where does that fit in here? And we have been hearing about things like people opening companies, like people start startups. They're usually registered with the state in which you incorporate. But we started hearing about people starting opening companies on the chain as well. So if you can please educate us on where does DAO fit in, and what is the relationship of DAO to a traditional company that is registered with the state?
Sure. So, what Web3 has now done is it's taken this concept of decentralization, not only while it started with technology and decentralizing databases and servers, really, to now decentralizing governance. And when I say governance, it's essentially a company structure, but it could eventually be expanded to a much larger scope as well. But talking about decentralizing companies, and DAOs are nothing but decentralized autonomous organizations simply saying they are decentralized companies. Now, the way so think about it this way: if no one owns Ethereum, and no one actually owns any of these protocols, because these protocols are, even if the core people, let's say Ethereum, Vitalik today, Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder of Ethereum, is a core kind of influencer and a core kind of component of the Ethereum network. If Vitalik tomorrow decides not to continue on with Ethereum, or the Ethereum Foundation decides not to continue on with Ethereum, the code will still exist with all the nodes, node operators, and all the validators, and will continue to run. That is the power of decentralization. But at that point, how does decision making happen? So if there is no kind of central entity, because the protocol is fundamentally on chain, the code is immutable, no one can change it, and it's going to live forever. And the core team behind writing that code initially is no longer involved in it. The way you continue to operate and continue to innovate and improve on that particular protocol is in a decentralized manner, through a DAO-like structure. And essentially what it means is that a lot of protocols have governance tokens. So folks who own these governance tokens have a right to a vote, in various decisions of the protocol, and that's how fundamentally a DAO operates.
Okay. So are you saying that technically people can open DAOs on the chain and treat it in similarly to a traditional company?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, in principle, yes. Though I would say DAOs are in day one, Vikash. And if you were to ask if you were to ask my opinion on this, I would say I'm not a big believer of DAOs at this point, because they have a long way to go before they are effective. There's a huge trade-off when you're running a protocol in a DAO-like structure. The trade-off is between efficiency and speed. Efficiency or decentralization. So on one hand, the power of DAOs is that there's no one individual making the decision, and people are making collective decisions. So of course, that's the power of decentralization. But that's a huge cost of efficiency, because if for major decisions you have to keep going back to a larger pool of people, take their voting, etc., etc., and they may not be the best people to make those decisions either, right? So I personally think DAOs, as a principle, is interesting, but still has a lot of evolution to do before it gets to larger adoption.
Got it. Got it. All right. There is one question in the chat that reads like, please suggest some trusted experts that I can follow for building an understanding of investing in the crypto market. Web searches are giving, I think it obviously leads to a lot of spam. But Rohit, if you don't have it on top of your head, maybe you can just email it to me and I can share it with the group. But they're interested in some trusted experts to follow, maybe on Twitter.
So, Vikash, I get asked this question a lot, and the answer to this is there is no easy answer to this. It's like saying ki someone wants to understand Web 2, is there someone I can follow to understand Web 2? There is no one you can follow to understand Web 2, right? You have to do the hard work. If you want to go deeper into the space, you have to do the hard work, and you have to put in the hours and go deeper into the space, if I were being blunt. But to get you guys started off, I would say two places where you can go to are Bankless. Is a podcast which I'm very fond of. So depending on where you are in your understanding of Web3, if you're trying to understand blockchain as a technology, and you're at the very initial kind of stages, I would say go to all of these platforms like Udemy, Udacity, etc. They have a lot of blockchain technology courses for relatively cheap, where in a few tens of hours you'll understand the underlying technology. So that could be a starting point. But when you do want to start understanding a little bit more of the business use case, again, that space is just very, very vast. But two resources that you could leverage: one is Bankless, which I've written on the chat window, and the other is A16Z's crypto school. Messari also has, sorry, not Messari, Consensus, MetaMask Consensus. Also has some crypto tutorials that you can look at. But yeah, unfortunately, there's no easy answer. There's no one person you can follow, or one destination you can go, which is a single source of truth for everything that's happening in Web3.
Awesome. Thank you, Rohit, for those references. I think we're reaching the end of the session, but before we close out, if there is any other question, please unmute yourself and talk yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, Rohit, I have one question. For someone who's new to this industry and want to take a transition in their career to get into a block, to get into some company which is in crypto or Web3, what's your advice? For me particularly, I tried this and I have like 9 years of experience in operations, but I'm not able to find a right career path in this crypto and Web3 world. Although it's very exciting, I wish to join, but a lot of times they say that you need pre-experience already from. So the qualification needs some prerequisites from that industry.
Deepak, are you a developer? Do you still actively code?
No, not at all. That's the thing. I completely come from a operations background, business operations.
Got it. Got it. Then the challenge, Deepak, is very similar to the challenge of breaking into any other industry, is that it's not easy. For a developer, it's actually the path to entering Web3 is actually very, very straightforward because there is a dearth of Solidity developers in the industry. At least let me answer the question for the developers on the call or folks who are still actively coding, is that if you learn Solidity, write a bunch of smart contracts, maybe do a couple of freelance projects, that in itself makes you hugely valuable. Deepak, the other thing that you could do if you're not actively coding is a couple of different things. Is you could start with certain central, not entirely decentralized players. Like, for example, an Optimism, which is a layer 2, or an Arbitrum, which is a layer 2. These are fairly decentralized protocols, and breaking into them without having deep Web3 experience is very difficult. But you'd stand a better chance of getting into, let's say, a Coinbase or some of the centralized players who are still operating in the Web3 space, but operating in a more centralized manner. I think you'll find better chance of creating a list of these Web3 centralized entities and entering into Web3 via that route. And after a couple of years of experience with a centralized entity, you can certainly move on to the decentralized side as well. The other thing, Deepak, you could do is startups, right? If there are Web3 startups, Web3 founders. See, the core principles of running a business don't change, whether it's Web3 or Web2, right? And given the experience that you've had, I see you're a 2013 pass out, so over 10 years of experience. Given the experience you've had, a Web3 founder who's starting off newly, young guy, will certainly value your experience. So the other thing that you could also do is, I'm not sure which city you live in, but you'll have a lot of Web3 communities over there, Web3 meetups and Web3 startup meetups happening there. You could start attending those Web3 startup meetups. You could freelance for some of these Web3 founders, where you kind of bring your expertise to bear to whatever they're building. And that gives you an opportunity to go deeper into Web3 while still leveraging your kind of experience and exposure.
Got it. Go ahead.
Awesome. Raju, I see you unmuted. Any question you want to ask? Raju? All right. I think that is an exhilarating session we had. Thank you so much for the informative talk there, Rohit, for a truly engaging and insightful session. Your exploration of blockchain fundamentals, the potential of Web3, the concept of chain abstraction has given us some understanding of how to view the decentralization and the Web3 world. It gave us a vantage point to understand and talk about it. And it also showed us how it can transform industries and empower users in ways that was not previously possible. So, for our audience, I hope today's session has sparked some curiosity and inspired you to delve deeper into this world of blockchain and Web3. I think our own Rohit's journey and expertise reminds us about the immense opportunities that lie at the intersection of this Web3 and the entrepreneurship as well. So we encourage you all to continue exploring these ideas and to think about how you can contribute to this space as well. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next session. Until then, take care, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Thank you all for joining, and thank you so much again, Rohit, for taking time and educating us today.
Thank you, Vikas. Thanks for organizing this. And thanks for everyone for patiently listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Rohit. Thanks, Vikas.